Welcome back, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745 here with another episode of Hearts of Iron 4 with Black Ice, of course. And we're playing as Germany. I'm, sitting here thinking, wondering if we should invade once, maybe, well, we're in May. Resource map, invade Yugoslavia. We got plenty of aluminum. That's something we don't really need. Not that we couldn't theoretically build enough to do that. We got right now enough cobalt, but we don't have tungsten. Or chromium. That's chromium, not cobalt. Chromium. There's plenty of chromium here if we need it. I don't know. I just don't know if there's a good enough reason to justify wanting to invade right now, because then we got to occupy it. Do want to take care. I'm justifying against Oman right now because I want that oil. That's hardly worth it, but that's 20%, so we at least get 3 out of that once we get that, and that's 8, so we get that when we get over there. We'll sweep up there, hopefully. Now, this is what often happens to me when I play this. Not as bad as when this mess is open to movement. It's terrible. There's all my good Panzer units, since they're my other good mobile units, and they're the ones I like to use, are down here taking, conquering territory, trying to get Tanganyika. When I sort of kind of want them for here, but I don't know yet when or if. End of last episode, and I know I ended a little early, but since we got both Norway and Iraq, I wanted to mostly clean up Norway and send units. They're going to be moving up to the Finnish border in places, so I wanted to do that in between and spend, if you notice, a bunch of my naval and army experience. Improve some tank models and some air models. Well, some air models, yes, and also submarines. Oh, somebody wants to come into the faction. Portugal wants to come into the faction. Yes, you may. We will gladly take Portugal. Now, we've got more military factories. Well, let's do it a little more. Okay, Panzer 1s, we're not producing any. We're slowly using up the few that we need up. 2s, I want to do fewer and fewer, so I'm producing some of the Czech armor, which is good. Got a lot of reserves, but like going in after the Soviet Union is going to start eating into them. Especially with, a lot of our armor units are in sort of rough terrain combat, so probably using a lot up through attrition. And we've got 2 factories, so let's increase that by 1 and this by 1. I don't know if I should have done both of them over. It's sort of the reason not to do them both over was, or to have two lines was to move one and leave the other one, the old one, but I just decided let's get the conversion over, and since we're facing combat actions down here, but not major ones like on the Eastern Front that would really be grinding up the tanks.
Ihre Befehle?
Oh, we got the oil here at this time. They didn't know or didn't have any drilling. Both. Oh, this is all one state. Okay. Well.
Bereit!
Naval invasion there. Get that.
Achtung!
Oh good, we got these guys on.
Angetreten! Ihre Befehle!
Very weak. Support them. Not so much weak, but disorganized.
Achtung! Bereit!
Belgian Congo. At one time that was a horrific place.
Befehle! Angetreten!
Latter part wasn't so much, but don't know if any of you really know or studied the sort of colonial history of Africa, and particularly the latter part in the post-colonial world. You can look at every region in Africa, and they're, from my understanding, and it's limited, I've never been there, so take this for what it is. I've read a lot of books. I've actually had at least one teacher in college that I took on African studies that was from Nigeria. She was from there, but also have known people mostly from Rhodesia and South Africa. White people, mostly. But talked to a lot of them. And there are different, at least from them, some different tribes behaved, and I'm not a racist. I don't believe it's racial. I believe it's cultural. It's cultural. It's not your race. It's at least that's my view of it. It's not your race. It's your culture. It's the way you were educated, brought up, the way you believe, that whole element. That's what I think is determinate in large groups, not in individuals. I'm trying to say this correctly and well, and I don't mean politically correct. I mean the way I'm trying to express myself as accurately as the way I believe. Individuals are individuals. That's one thing. The other thing is large groups of people. And so I'm very much of a culturalist. I believe it's culturally based. So I don't believe that it's racially. I believe it's cultural. Part of that belief comes from knowing so many people of African descent, some very African, some very mixed, but in America it doesn't matter how, at least modern day, how mixed you are, just if you're African or not. But of African descent, And then also, and I have met more than just, a few, but I've met a few and then read about a lot, how different Africans are from African Americans. So that's why I look at it as a cultural thing, not as a racial thing. So that being said, like the Igbo tribe, if you will, but it's a sort of group down here, they were supposedly very industrious mindset. And so there are differences between the different localized groups. But if you step away from that and look at larger areas with multiple tribal groupings in them, you could almost just go down and plot and look at the know who the colonial master is, or was, obviously was, and then know how well the country is doing today. And it's almost invariably if you were colonized by the English, you're doing above average in Africa. If you were colonized by the Belgians, or some of the worst in it, but also sort of the Portuguese, for their sort of wanting to hold on to it. You look at the strife in Mozambique and Angola. The Italians. Somalia is a basket case if you don't realize that today. I mean, it is basically a failed state, except for Somaliland, which almost no one recognized, and it's the former British colony that's officially broken off and have set up their own country here, that don't care about what's going on here, and they're not a failed state at all. There may be some connection to some of the piracy going on out here, but not too much, I don't think. And they have their own country, their own government, their own economy, and it's considerably, for the region, it's doing very well. It's not a failed state just because of, goes back to the Organization of African Unity, my opinion, a very bad organization. One of the things that Organization of African Unity has strived to do from its history, the OAU, is to not allow border changes and not to recognize border changes. Because if you notice, throughout this history of Africa, here in the post-colonial world, there has been almost zero border changes. I can point to the two that are coming to mind. One is acknowledging the separation of Eritrea here from Ethiopia. That's one, and that was a long, hard-fought thing. The other one now is South Sudan, which is, these are mega states, but it's, down in here. South Sudan, that allowed a new country to, I talked about the Igbos before, they tried to do their breakaway civil war with Nigeria. Basically, it was a war of independence, not a who was going to control Nigeria. They wanted to break away. Katanga down here wanted to break away from the rest of the Belgian Congo. These provinces here. Now, it was fine to change borders as you separated from England. So you got Zambia, which had been Northern Rhodesia, and Nasaya land here. That was fine when you were breaking up. There's only one other border change that, and it's sort of looked upon, I would say, as a breaking up of the colonial era, and that is South Africa's sort of end of its colonial era here, and Walvis Bay, which I think would be right about there. It should be a small little. Walvis Bay had been part British territory before Southwest Africa became German territory, so it was a small English enclave that transferred to South Africa once South Africa was sort of set up as a Dominion state and was directly there. And so through the whole South African apartheid era, when they were controlling Southwest Africa, and they recognized Southwest Africa was not part of South Africa. It was Southwest Africa, but it was occupied and administered by South Africa. But Walvis Bay had been part of South Africa. That's been transferred to Southwest Africa as an independent country. Otherwise, they have vehemently fought the Organization of African Unity. Any border changes, even where, and I'm just going to arbitrarily go, even where, say, one tribe or ethnic group or whatever you want to say, but, well, let's call them a language group, because its tribe is sort of, especially if you're sort of thinking American Indian, well, the Sioux and some of those are pretty big nations. Some of them were sort of big nations and things, but one language group up, that would be have people here and have a lot of people down here are split between two different countries, and they're ethnically one sort of tribal group, but they won't allow them to border adjust either into getting their own country or these people join this other country or vice versa. They've fought against that. So that's why the borders haven't changed, because they sort of enforce that recognition. So you can go through and you can look at the situation here. Eritrea has never done terribly well. It's doing a little better now that it's no longer occupied by Ethiopia. They're sort of, Eritreans are Muslim-based, Ethiopia is Christian. Ancient old Christian, not colonialized, imported Christianity. They're ancient old Christians. And, so these two groups, and even though there's multiple tribes within this group, they were sort of separated out that way. But so Somalia, the Italian colonies are, former colonies are a basket case here. Now this doesn't hold true for the Arab nations. I'm talking sub-Saharan Africa here. But you look, the French, they're generally not as bad as the the Belgians and the Italians, but they're nowhere near as good as the British, and sort of like I say, the Belgian Congo is that. So you can look at how bad the countries are doing by who ruled them, and there's sort of one, in my opinion, tragic case was Rhodesia. It had been a breadbasket of the region. It was yes, when the whites were in charge, it was a racist government. Nowhere near the apartheid levels of South Africa. In Rhodesia, black people could vote, but you had to own property and not be, they had some tribal trust lands and not the property be in the tribal trust lands. So that there were, out of, I don't know, I'm just pulling the number out of the air, but say 60 members of parliament or something for Rhodesia, something like 10 of them were black. So that, and black African, not the sort of, the coloreds that you find in South Africa, which are the mixed group. But so that some blacks could vote, they had some representation, but again, it was racist. I'm not trying to say it wasn't, but it wasn't the sort of South African racist apartheid system. It was definitely organized up to make sure that the whites had a majority. But it is just sort of under Mugabe. Now, see, we should realize that there was Rhodesia. They, and it was the unilateral Declaration of Independence. Britain didn't recognize it. Most of the world didn't recognize it. Few countries did, but South Africa, Portugal. But they had their own sort of guerrilla problems at the time. Recognized it. And then they, because of outside pressure, they set up and they had a open election. I almost said free and fair. Don't know if it was quite free and fair, but ZANU and ZAPU, I believe, had ability to have people vote for them. Not sure. I knew at one time. I don't know. Those are the two guerrilla groups. In there, they sort of hated each other. But they had a definitely universal suffrage, at least of males, but maybe females, but everybody could vote. No property requirements, all that was getting rid of, so blacks voted. And they voted in a guy named Maurice Bishop. And at that time, the name was changed to Zimbabwe Rhodesia. And this was in about the last 6 months of the life of Rhodesia. They had this election. A lot of people came and watched it. A lot of people had criticisms about it because I think they were in the tank for the communists, the ZANU and ZAPU, the two groups. And so they didn't want to recognize it, but they put in a black popularly elected prime minister, and he very much was going to lead a government of national unity. I forget what his party was called, but alongside the white political party, and that they were going to move forward into a non-racially organized Rhodesia, but the whites were going to be able to stay. They were going to be able to continue to own their land. Maurice Bishop, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I'm not a big expert on him, but he came out of sort of the sort of Christian missionary movements, and he was, compared to some of the communists going on in the time, very much a Christian believer, but he wanted a certain level of social justice going on, because there was quite unfair things, and I think eventual breakdown of the tribal trust lands within Rhodesia and normalizing all of that into it. But it was going to be a process over years. It wasn't going to be, we won the elections, now we're all in charge and everything changes tomorrow. It was going to be a process, but the rest of the world didn't accept that. So and for, I have it on reasonably good, and again I forget some of the details, reliable information, think about the last 2 years of the Rhodesian conflict. The entire Rhodesian defense budget was paid for entirely by South Africa. South Africa knew that if Rhodesia fell, then the next heavy pressure that had already been started would have come into Southwest Africa and then eventually against themselves. So that they were trying to hold the line there in Rhodesia. And so Rhodesia had been only sort of funding its other domestic abilities. But it just got too much for South Africa, it got too much for the Rhodesians, and I also believe that a lot of the whites didn't really trust Maurice Bishop enough, and if, I know I'm going into this in modern politics, I'm sorry, maybe if you guys are bored, I hope you guys just skip over the list. If it didn't get them the lifting of the embargoes and the recognition of Rhodesia that they wanted to, they weren't going to continue to fight desperately for this new government. I think there was an element of that. And I think also the more and more inability of South Africa to pay for the war, and the war costing more and everything. So the Rhodesians basically gave up, and for, I think it was maybe a whole week or more, what had been Southern Rhodesia became Southern Rhodesia, and it became back under the British colonial empire. It no longer was independent. It was under Britain, and then Britain oversaw new elections and turning it over to, between ZANU and ZAPU, and I forget which one was Nkomo and which one was Mugabe, Robert Mugabe, but Mugabe won it, and man, he's still alive. He has trashed that country. He is a bigoted, terrible dictator. No, I don't think he's into cannibalism and other things that Idi Amin was, but he has just run Rhodesia into the ground in this Zimbabwe, as it, purely now Zimbabwe, and it is just awful. That is sort of the one country that doesn't normally fit the mold. Sort of an intermediate country you have here is like Tanganyika or Tanzania, because you add in Zanzibar, which you get Tanzania. It's doing okay, but it's not doing as well as, say, Kenya here. That, more British influence. So that's sort of, you can look at who the colonial masters and know how well the country is doing by sort of who the colonial masters were and how they did it. Sometimes like the Belgian Congo, where for a long time they had internal slavery under the Belgians, up until like 1900 or later. It was an awful place under them. Sorry to say, but it really was. So yeah, I sort of, study these things. And yes, I'm opinionated, and yes, my submarines have finished up, I think. Okay, so we are no longer producing coastal, and I still want to produce one set of coastal submarines, but I got a new type. This one here. And let's see, that is those are mid-range, so we got some mid-range there. Mid-range, some long range. Let's do another. There we go. And of course, one of the good things of having being like Yugoslavia is get a Mediterranean port, but well, let's put both of these. Down here. And it's their launching point. That was sort of my short version of what I know and think of Africa. And yes, I'm not politically correct, and yes, in the modern schools they probably have a lot of bad names for me. But they probably haven't studied the issue well enough to know. And their ideology blinds them from looking at it at a analytical way. Okay, request from Vichy. Okay. Portugal. No, we don't want. What is this? No, decline. We don't want you to do that. I know we're sort of kicking ass in Africa, but we really don't need you in that war. No, I didn't want to do air. Well, we can't. Well, we need to put. Yeah, that's true. We need to put air bases there. What I want to do actually is let's see if we can get more tungsten out of you. No, the 3 isn't worth. But yeah, so since we're here, we can base some aircraft. Get them down here and put them out here on the Iberian coast. I do try to be thoughtful about it, and I do try to really sort of study Africa in many forms.
Ausrücken! Ausrücken!
Okay. Now let's do another long range. We need a mini map. Podcat, we need a mini map. Especially with how cluttered, be it with all the stuff the window can get.
Ihre Befehle! Ausrücken!
There we go. Well, we already have. Got some submarines still operating there.
zuhören. Befehle! Achtung! Angetreten!
Is Iran opinion change? No, it's slowly getting a little better, but not by much. And this we even need to change. They like us, but they're not giving us more oil. Okay, yes, we're getting ready for our invasion once we clean up here. Okay. Yes.
Ihre Befehle?
And another ace pilot. Need to reorganize those. Yeah, let's see if we can send over some more shipping. Or subs. I sent a few down here. Okay, yes, 3 mid-range subs. Send them around there.
Ihre Befehle?
Wait for them to organize themselves up and we'll go. I'm already building. Let's check. It'll be sort of a long episode. I'm already building some radar down here. Now, these things we need to move to the top because we want them. Particularly, of course, the civilized seas, because that will help with everything else. It'll help rebuild it. And, well, let's see. Move on into that now. So what we need to do here is... I do want to expand my industry, but... I think these, and particularly that, is my biggest limitation right now. So, what I can do here is... deal with my biggest limitation. Build a few oil fields. Move them to the top. Or not oil fields, but conversion. And that way some of these are still growing, but we're also building more of those, which will help out a lot. That's what we need to do here. As we're in June. I just don't think we're going after the Soviets this year. Just don't know. Now's the time to go for it. Here, and then we'll take a little bit of a look.
Bereit!
Do here. Thanks for liking the videos. I do appreciate that, and please post questions, comments, suggestions. I see you next time for more.